Hey, it's Tommy here. Welcome back to another episode. Now, today I wanted to talk and run over how I look at training so you can look at the bigger picture rather than just getting, caught up in the nuances of single sessions. Now, we have quite a few lifters that are prepping now for a powerlifting nationals competition here in Brisbane. It's the APL Nationals. And, conversations that I get to have with my lifters and my team is, not to get too caught up on any particular session. Now, obviously, we, towards the end of our training blocks, we're starting to ramp things up. But to get to that particular point in time, you've done so much work to get yourself ready for that. Now, you're not a machine. Not every single session is going to be perfect. So as a lifter, what you need to be looking at is going, I've done the work, I've come in and I can only look at the session that's in front of me because that session there is just a point in time. Now, what I want to do is zoom out a little bit and sort of discuss how we get to that particular point. Now, you might be, let's say for instance, prepping for a powerlifting competition. And, in your head as a lifter, as an athlete, you've got this idea of every session, every number that you want to hit. And your only metric of success is hitting that said number. Now, it's a really good thing. It's a great attribute to have because it keeps you motivated. It keeps you pushing towards that goal that you want so much. But the reality is training isn't going to be perfect. And you need to sort of look at the bigger picture and go, I've done 8 months of work to get to this particular point. That might be 6, 7, 8 training phases to get to that, plus the years of training that you've had prior to this. So there's no particular session in that training block, in a peaking block, for instance, that is actually going to be make or break. If you come in and you have a session that's not particularly good, or it doesn't feel like you wanted it to, like say for instance, you came in, you wanted to squat 200, but it wasn't just there on the day and you ended up squatting 190. That is not a failed session. It's not a failed prep. It just means that you didn't have it on that particular day. And the flip side of that is at comp, you may not have that either. So you've got to honestly get to a point with your training where you start to just stack things up. You think of it as a savings account. You come in and you look at the session that you have ahead of you and you do what you can. Now, when you think about it, like say for instance, you only have one exposure to a heavy single at the end of a powerlifting prep, right? In a peaking block. Then you think that you haven't hit that number. You think that whole prep has been a failed prep. It hasn't been because you've done all that work beforehand. So I think sometimes when we're looking at it is, there's times where you're analytical about your actual training itself, and there's times where you've just got to get in there and just do the work and show up for that particular session. Now, it can be a hard pill to swallow because sometimes you've done all this work and you've put so much expectation and pride into your actual training and the outcome that you're getting. But, you could have a bad sleep. You could have, a poor day of eating. There could be, things that are outside of your control in your life that are putting stress on you. So your training's not always going to be perfect and it's not always going to be reflective of the work that you've done. So you then need to go back and zoom out a little bit and go, hey, I've done 8, 10, 12 months worth of training to get to this particular event. And I need to trust the fact that I've done enough work that when I show up on the day, I've had a deload, I'm feeling really good. Now, I've always felt, a bit funny about like powerlifting peaks and stuff like that, just because there feels like there's so much pressure on the end of the training block itself. So quite often what I look at doing with my clients is 2 phases out, I give them exposure to something that's really heavy that they've, close to a 1RM or close to a comp PB, get them close to something so they feel very, very confident in themselves. And in that second last block, they've had that exposure to something that even if they had no more exposures, when they got onto the platform, for instance, they would be so ready to go. But what I do is give it to them in a way that's sub-maximal at the end of that block so that when they come back down, because in the next block, they'll start at a lower point and then they'll generally start to creep up a little bit higher. So you've already had one really heavy exposure, but now you get the opportunity to have another exposure at that weight. Now, a perfect example of this is bench press. Like bench press doesn't peak all that much in comp. It's not like you're going to add 10 or 20 kilos as a good lifter to your bench press. So if you get to a point that you're happy with your bench, you might get 2 really heavy exposures to the same number. And if you can get that in comp, That's a really big win. So it takes the stress off that final peaking block. So I think sometimes the word peaking block as well, actually kind of the connotation around that means like it's going to be the best, it's going to be everything. But the reality is your peak should be on the platform. It shouldn't be in training. So it's really a consolidation block of all the work you've done, but it's really the last few blocks are consolidation blocks of all the work that you've done to get you ready for the platform. So really it's just getting you to a point where mentally you feel strong, mentally you feel ready. And once you've had a deload, you're ready to jump on the platform and hopefully attempt some really good numbers. So the connotation around peaking blocks, sometimes I think it really is a checkpoint, because the platform itself is the place that you're actually expressing yourself. And that's the place that we want all the PBs. So you don't actually want to leave everything on the table in training, because training is just the point in time that's going to get you to the platform. Now, I know this is really hyper focused on powerlifting, because we have quite a few guys at the moment that are, guys and girls that are competing in a few weeks' time. But just on the top of mind, if you think about it, like even if you're doing like a training session, you come in, and you're training, you're not even powerlifting, and you come in and you jump under a bar and it's not feeling particularly good. And, last week you did 100 kilos for a certain amount of reps. This week you have this expectation that you think you should go more than that. Whenever you're having any sort of adversity around these particular training sessions, what I always revert back to is drop it down to a point that it feels really good and do a good amount of work that feels constructive. So it might not be your strongest day. You might not get into the gym and be like, I'm so strong today, I'm going to hit a PB. But what is going to happen is if you drop it back a little bit, you're not absolutely on the threshold. You can come in, get some really good work done, and actually leave the gym going, hey, high five, I nailed that. I feel really good for that particular session. And hopefully next week when I can come in, I can make a little bit of progress on what I did 2 weeks prior. And it's a really easy way to shift your mindset away from, taking the stress off any particular session, because there's literally no one session that is going to sort of be a linchpin in everything that you do. It is really just a combination of your accumulated effort over time. And as that accumulates, you build confidence in yourself. You build confidence in, knowing that you can have an outcome that's going to be really positive. Now, it's actually quite funny because, as a newer lifter into the gym, and as you come in, you see this thing where people want to get strong really, really quickly, right? So they're okay to sit on the threshold and they're like, keen to push the numbers up, get their nervous system firing and really sort of push up their weight. Once they get to a certain point, there's a level of maturity that comes into it where you're okay to do sets and reps because you know that you're building a base, and the base is the thing that's going to allow you to express your strength at a later point. And I think that's something, it's the same sort of mindset that we need to have when we get towards these peaking blocks. Is there just a moment in time, and you have to have that maturity as a lifter going, hey, I know that I've done so much work to get to this particular point, and nothing can unravel that. I've done it, I've done the work, and, I'm good to go. But not every day can be perfect. And, you can have a perfect plan, you can have a perfect program on paper, and some days you come in and it's just not working for you. And that is so okay. So I think, zooming out sometimes on your training is sometimes you need to just show up and you just do what you can. And other times you need to turn off your brain and get in and just do the work. We had a situation in the gym where one of my lifters a couple of weeks ago came in, and they came into a session and that, they were approaching a really heavy weight, and it's like their brain just kind of switched off. And the chat that I actually had was, you need to just get in there and stop thinking. You've done so much work to get to this particular point in time. You need to just get under the bar. It was a squat. Get under the bar and just show up and just do the thing. Stop thinking. And that's trusting the process, like trusting the fact that you've done so much work to get to that particular point that you have to trust the process. You have to trust your body and know that you can do it. So, there's sometimes where you come into a training session and you've just got to take what's in front of you and be constructive. And there's other times where you've actually just got to get to work. So, I think it's an important conversation. It's something that you should keep in the back of your mind, whether you're training for, a powerlifting comp, whether you're just training for base strength, where you're training to put on muscle mass. Not every session is going to be perfect, and that's okay. Show up, do the work, and take what's there on the day so that you have a constructive session, because the reality is training is so much bigger than any one session. It's the accumulative effort of all your training sessions, all of your recovery, the food that you put into your body, and the years that add up over time. So that's it for me today, and I'll see you on the next episode.